Hey guys, we got a 2007 Mazda 6. This is the 3-liter V6, and she came in for running really rough, shaking, all that sort of stuff, bad vibration. So do a full code scan. Hopefully it glares not too bad. And we just got the P0302 cylinder 2 misfire. So on Mazda's this generation, unfortunately they don't give you that great data to go off of. So if we go to the vehicle, if we get out of there, we go into powertrain. This is one of the things I like to do before I even fire it up. I'll read codes, then I'll go to livedata, just kind of familiarize myself. What kind of options do I have available to me? What kind of data? What kind of tests can I run? What kind of information can I get? And I'd like to know that before I fire it up, because what happens if, it's something that only happens in the beginning? So I'll just peruse through the live data. So we got accelerator pedal, barrel, cam, evap, throttle. Oxygen sensor, fuel trims. Sometimes fuel trims can give us a indication as to what bank it's on, but keep in mind we had the P0302. We didn't have a P0300, the random misfire. So as far as we know, we could just be tracking down a single cylinder misfire. And nada. So we got no misfire counters at all in data. So what else can we look at? I'll just look through active test. And can we find anything in here that could potentially help us out along the way? Not overly. Okay, we can shut down individual injectors one at a time, but again, we're not chasing down a misfire on a cylinder we don't know. And those typically only really help you if it's a dead miss. So I don't know, we're probably not going to go that route. We'll get back out of here. Now remember, the Mazdas are kind of like Fords, so we can click on hot functions. Do we have the misfire graphic that Ford gives you? And no, we don't have any cylinder, so we can get out of there. Now I can go to service, and we can go with powertrain. Come on. Try fuel. Maybe there's something in here. I doubt it. And sure enough, just the evap test. So we'll go back out of there. But keep in mind, remember, we did say this is a Ford. Escape. OBD. We'll go with mode 6. Because it should have the misfire data in the mode 6, just like a Ford. Now keep in mind, these are non-continuous monitors, so it doesn't run all the time. So this is one of the reasons why you don't want to clear codes when you got misfires. Alright, we're back. I just had a customer pop up. Quick question. So yeah, mode 6. We don't want to clear codes right away when you're dealing with a misfire. Or really anything until you kind of know what you're dealing with and it's safe to clear codes. So we'll go through, we'll look to see for misfire monitors. Because if you clear codes, it'll take a long time before these update. So we are looking for misfire cylinder 1. So you can see at the top, we can see the MID, TID, so module ID, test ID. We got min, we got value, we got max, we got unit. We don't really know what these are in. I think these are for actual misfire counts, but regardless, it doesn't matter what the numbers are. We're just looking relative numbers. So we got zeros on 1. And we see right here, we got a whole bunch on 2. Cylinder 2. And we see nothing on 3. Nothing on 4. only 3 on 5, and nothing on 6. So again, 3, that's just 3, right? We can ignore that. That doesn't really mean anything to us, especially compared to, you know, 600 or so, right? So we'll be chasing solely after a cylinder 5, or sorry, cylinder 2 misfire. It's always nice in cases like this when you can go with live data and you can actually see who's who, so you know you can swap coils. We can't do that on here, so we'd have to rely with other means. We might just pull out the lab scope and see if we can find it on the lab scope. We'll, you know, see if it's a secondary, or if it's a coil or an injector. Might try and start that way, but for now I'll show you what it's doing if it comes up on the camera. So hopefully you can make that out. It's not a dead miss, but seems to rev okay. But down at idle, it's definitely got an occasional misfire. And it's not like a partial misfire. It's when it does misfire, it misfires, but not quite a dead misfire. Again, I don't know if you can catch that or if you can fully make that out. Maybe you can see that, maybe you can see the tack needle flutter occasionally. But anyways, we'll pull it in the shop and we'll look to see what we see. Okay, so we got the vehicle in the shop. We're about ready to do some actual diagnosing. And first thing I always start with is I always double check the cylinder layout. Never want to assume, you know, don't go fall down the wrong path over something stupid simple as this, right? So all I end up doing is I just type it, year, make, model, and firing order into Google, look for a bunch of pictures that all look the same, with the same layout. So if we look right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this nice picture right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. As I expected, cylinder 2 is the back center underneath the plenum. So not nice to get to without pulling everything apart. So what we're going to start with, what we're going to try for, is we're going to hopefully find a nice spot where we can put our amp clamp around a central spot that can get a capture of all the injectors as well as all the coils. So we'll hope that we have nice fuses we can get to, and hopefully they're on separate fuses, or maybe we can find a connector or a splice somewhere that we can put them around. So then we go to our wiring diagram, our powertrain control module wiring diagram. So we just scroll down, we just look for our injectors or coils. Sure enough, here are our injectors. We look for the common wire, so these 3 wires here come up to here, and then these 3 injectors, they also feed into that. So we just follow that up. We do have a connector there somewhere. We follow that up here, and we got a splice. So we got injector fuse right here, which is a 15 amp. We do see it also goes to the throttle body, electric throttle body, but it only goes to the switch side of the relay. It doesn't actually power the throttle body. So that's only 100 to 200 milliamps. That won't affect our capture very much. But if we follow the rest of the wire over, we see it comes to the splice here, and it goes to our powertrain control module. Now, typically, not always, but typically the top 2 wires are actual power feeds of some kind or another. So we would have to assume that there's probably a high chance that it's actually using this circuit to power something, which means we might get a bunch of noise in our capture looking for our fuel injectors. Which also sucks because our fuel injectors only use about 1 amp of current, whereas our coils, they use about 10 amps. So our fuel injectors, they won't stand out as much compared to background noise, but we should still be able to see amp ramps, at least enough to see if one is missing. So we know that we can do our test right here for this injector fuse, which is a 15 amp. in the main fuse block, left front inner fender well, so this will be under the hood. So now let's look for our ignition coils. So not our injectors, our coils. Keep looking, we got some sensors. This is coil unplugged, so it won't be a big coil pack. It'll be individual coils. So we're looking for 6 of them. And right down here. So same thing here, we're looking for the commonality, right? The common wire. So these 3 wires here, they go into the central wire. These 3 coils over here, they go into here. We got a capacitor, but that won't add very much. So here's our power feed, we'll follow that back. We got a connector, pin 41, or sorry, wire 41. Go over to this side, wire 41, okay, there's a splice. Comes across to 40. So let's follow the splice up. And we got another splice. So same thing here, it runs the switch side of a relay. It doesn't run the pump itself, not the load side, just the switch side. And then we have engine fuse, which is a 15 amp. So this will be our coils. So let's go back to this side right here. So that's 40 of the previous page. See what else is on that circuit, because this is all going to add noise to our capture. So we kind of want to know, so we're looking for 27. We kind of know what to expect when we do our capture. How viable of an option is this going to be? And this also goes through our engine computer. But if we see here, it goes to a wire that's kind of in around the middle near the end, but it's not at the very end. So this is probably just the key on signal. The engine computer is probably not using that circuit for much else. And even if it did, it probably wouldn't matter too much for the coils, because our coils use so much current. So the reason for checking the other things on these circuits is if we see it goes to a lot of things, particularly say our fuel injectors. Say if our fuel injectors, if that circuit also powered things like oxygen sensor heaters, well, you know what, it might be really hard to get a good waveform at the fuse. Then we would want to try and find something that only runs directly to the injectors. Let's say a splice or a connector that is right before the fuel injectors, right? But we don't see anything necessarily too alarming, so we can go for the fuses in the fuse boxes. So we got our injector fuse, which is the 15 amp, in the main fuse block. That's the under hood. So then our ignition coils was also a 15 amp, and it was this engine fuse. And so hindsight, I'm filming this part after I did the testing. Right now I read that says fuse block under left side of dash, so this is in car. When I was doing my testing and hooking up, I thought this one was also under the hood, so which is not. So of course what I did was I was looking for other 15 amp fuses, because just because it says engine fuse here doesn't necessarily mean that your fuse cover is going to have the same lettering, right? So I started looking around, just kind of guessing, looking for something that looked like coils, and kind of got mixed up there a little bit until I realized the error of my ways, and then found out, yes, it's actually inside the car. So anyways, let me show you my hookups, and we'll get to capturing some waveforms. Okay, so we got our engine cover off, and if we look in there, I did look in there before. It's pretty tight. I couldn't really see any wire harnesses for any of the fuel injectors. So you know what, if we did have a mouse in there, well, I don't really see any nests or anything. Usually you see them right in the valley. That's where they like to sit. That's why they go after injectors. So I don't really see anything in there that indicates that too much. Of course, you got a little bit of seeds in there, a little bit of material, but you know, just what every vehicle does. And then if we look in here, that first one is coil number 1. And hard to see, maybe I can get you in a little further. Can I get this light in a better spot? You can just kind of make out the base of coil 2. So I can get my wand in there and maybe I can get a capture on that. But let me just quickly set up, and I'll show you my setup once I'm ready, and we'll get some captures. We'll see if we can't figure out what's going on. Okay, so we got our scope set up, we got our captures ready. You can probably see on the scope the yellow trace is going all over the place. Well, that's because I don't have that. That'll be the wand. Say we can put that to there. That will be generating all kinds of noise because it's not really hooked up to anything. So what I have is our first trace. Our blue trace will be around our fuel injectors. Our red trace will be around our coils, at least what we suspect are our coils. Our green trace will be into number 4 ignition coil, and then we can plug in our firing order to find the number 2. So then what we'll do is, we got our wand. I can reach back there. First, I'm just going to get a capture of this, kind of see if I see anything, and then I might get a capture of the wand because I don't know how well I'll be able to grab that. But yeah, without further ado, I'm gonna hop in there. Oh yeah, and by the way, if you're doing this sort of stuff, it's really handy to have more than one low amp clamp, because yeah, since these fuses are right next to each other, I could have put them together, could have put a single amp clamp around them. That way you could get everything on one channel, but that makes so much noise. I don't like doing that. I like having them separate. So yeah, 2 amp clamps, that's the way to go. So let's go over here. We'll fire it up and hopefully we can capture an event right away. Hard to tell at the elevated idle, but it felt like there was a hiccup or two in there. So let me go over here, pause all that. Oh, I really should have upped the sample rate, but whatever. So let me save this. Let me put you down. I'm going to save this and kind of get the capture set up. Okay, so this is our capture that we took. This is what initially it looked like. And I thought that this case study with this car was kind of interesting. I had a few goes at it. I had a few captures that didn't quite work out. And I thought that that would make an interesting video of what happens in the real world when you're trying to use the lap scope. Because you know what? A lot of times what you see on YouTube is kind of the finished cut, right? What actually worked. There's a lot of times where we go to use these things and we don't really get good results. Maybe it's not acting up. Maybe we're not making a good connection. Maybe we just get a garbage capture. We got to redo it, right? So I decided to use a bunch of the captures and a bunch of the information that happened from this video for this car, I mean, to make a separate video of kind of what you actually can encounter in the real world and how to overcome it, how to tell when you're not making connection, how to tell when you're on the wrong circuit, all that sort of stuff. Check your equipment. If you get something that doesn't make sense, try not to get confused. Just take a step back, recheck your equipment, retest, and go on and go on. Rather than just getting confused and fall down a rabbit hole, wild goose chase. So I'll post a link to that video down in the description. I think there'll be lots of good information in there. But anyways, let's take a look at this capture, because what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to get a capture of the amp clamps of, the amp ramps of the coils and the fuel injectors. And we're not exactly sure which one is the proper fuse for the coils. We're trying to find that. So this yellow trace, that's for our secondary wand. I did not use that, so we'll get that out of the way. We got our blue trace, and we have our red trace. We don't know which one's which. We suspect one of them's coils, or we hope one of them's coils and one of them's going to be fuel injectors. The green trace, we know that's our primary voltage on the cylinder 4 ignition coil. So we know what that is. That's all good. Let's zoom in. We'll find a couple captures, a couple events, and this is the cylinder 4 spark plug firing. So we bring our cursors over and we set it so that we have 6 rulers in between each, right? One for each cylinder. We go back to our firing order, 1, 4, 2, 5, 3, 6. So these represent each cylinder firing. So this one's cylinder 4, this one's cylinder 2, this one's cylinder 5, this one's cylinder 3, this one's cylinder 6, and back to cylinder 1. And then 4. Again, and so on and so on. So we can use, that was the whole purpose of this green trace on the cylinder 4, was just to be a sync. So we can figure out which cylinder is what, in case we're missing something on a amp ramp for a coil or a fuel injector. So now what we can do, we can zoom out. And of course, using picoscope makes this really easy to do. You can do this sort of stuff on a Snap-on or Autel or someone else, just it might be a little more steps involved. So now that I've got my ruler set up for each cylinder, I can zoom in on this capture and I can look at it and I can see, okay, so we have 1 here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then back repeating again. So we do have 6 events. We're not sure if these are coils or fuel injectors, so let's bring down some cursors. We do know that both our coil and our fuel injector circuits are going to have other stuff on them. So we got to try and filter out other junk. We know we're going to see an ugly pattern on both. So I brought one horizontal cursor down to roughly the top of those amp ramps, and I brought another one down to the 0 line. So we see the top is roughly around 138 millivolts, and with the scaling that I'm using on my amp clamp, that translates to 1.3 amps. So that tells me we should be on fuel injectors because they use roughly an amp. A coil is going to use roughly 10 amps. But if you look down here, you remember again that this circuit powers a bunch of other things. So this might be the 0 amperage line, but it's not the 0 line for our fuel injectors because there's other stuff using current. When the fuel injectors turn on, there are other things on the circuit also using current. So we can actually bring this up to roughly around there. That's probably around the 0 mark for our fuel injectors. And we can look at our delta. We got 101 millivolts. Well, that's right around an amp, so perfect. Those are our fuel injectors. Sure, it looks noisy as all heck. We can't 100% tell with where we did this capture. We can't 100% tell if we have a bad coil in our fuel injector, if it's shorted or not, because keep in mind these usually do have current limiting devices. But we do know that they're all there. So we can put that out of our mind for now. Now we can look at our other trace and see, do we have captures of the coils? So I'll zoom out and we'll bring up our red trace. This is the one that we were hoping was coils. And if we look at that, so these are each of the 6 cylinders firings. We have a lot of stuff in between. And if we bring down cursors here to roughly top and then roughly bottom, we see we have 37 millivolts. That's 370 milliamps. Not enough for coils and way too many vents. So this is not coils. We can ignore this. Right about here is when I realized, hey, this ain't working for guessing. Let's go back to our wiring diagram and figure out why I can't find coils. Obviously, I'm on the wrong fuse. Let's recheck where that fuse is, and that's where I discovered my mistake. So anyways, I wanted to kind of show you this because you know what? Hey, not everything works out as you planned, and you got to be able to work around this sort of stuff to tell when you're on the right thing or not, and when to go off of what you captured, or when to be like, hey, I don't trust that, I got to redo this. So if you're new to lab scoping, or if you've struggled before in the past, kind of had some head scratching moments, I highly recommend the extended video that I do just on this sort of stuff here for this video, or sorry, for this car, of just kind of all the pitfalls I came into and the wrong connections and all that, and how to overcome them. Again, they'll be down in the description. But for now, let's carry on. We'll go back to the wiring diagram. Okay, so I found the problem. If we look right here, that's his engine bar. So that's our engine bar fuse. That's not what we want. But this one right here, that says the fuse box, left side of dash. So the coil fuse, the engine fuse 15 amp, that's inside the vehicle. So I'd have to switch that over. Let me just try and quickly do that. I'll show you a quick shot of that, and kind of starting to run out of time on this. So what we'd want to do, put the key in the on position. We see we have 194,000 on the clock. So we'll keep that in mind. So, great. Okay, what do we got? Okay, so if we can see this right here, we have right up here engine ignition, which is a 15 amp, and that's our only engine 15 amp. So we'll go in there and we'll try that. Okay, so if we see, we got our two relays, and then on the left side there's a 10 amp fuse, and then there's a 15 amp fuse. We want that 15 amp fuse, the one directly above that. So, oh no, take it down for a second. Hopefully you can see that. Yank that out. Put that in our fuse, buddy. Of course, it's one of these micro fuses. So the mini fuses are the same profile, they just stick out a little bit more, but I can't fit this in my amp clamp, so let me just quickly get one of those. Okay, so we got our 15 amp fuse. We got our mini, not our micro. It's over there. I know, really bad lighting. See if we can get that a little bit better. I'm trying to go quickly because I'm trying to get out of here. So we can quickly throw this in there. Get this guy somewhere like that. I know we're beeping. And we'll put you in there. Come on. Come on. Just do it. Okay, perfect. So we're in. So now what we'll do is we'll hop out. And now we are properly on our injectors and on our coils. So we'll see what we see now. So pause that just to start that over again. Okay, so let me fire that up and see if we have any better luck this time. Maybe we can get her. All right, good, she's popping. Okay, hopefully you heard that. But the first few events definitely popped. All right, and if we look over here again, because I did move things, so our blue trace is going inside. Our blue trace is our coils. Let me save this before I lose that. Okay, so we are set up, and holy smokes, what's going on with our red? Red is supposed to be our coils, is it not? Or our injectors, I mean. We are in the injector fuse, but yeah, we're in there. Don't have the low battery light on. Plugged in. I don't see any injector ramps on there. Maybe I have to zoom in. Okay, there they are. There. So no biggie, we can use that. Zoom out again. So we see some spikes. That's right when it was popping, right around the beginning. I know there's a lot of noise. We don't have our magic wand hooked up to anything, so I can get rid of that. For now, I can get rid of the red. And we're just going to focus in on these amp ramps on the coils. So if we go here, and we're negative. That sucks. But we do see something that appears to be repetitive. So what we'll do is we'll go tools, math channels, invert A, okay, because of course we're upside down. We'll get rid of blue. We'll just look at dark blue. Okay, we're just gonna zoom out just a tiny touch. All right, and look at that. Let's get the blue completely out of the way. All right, let's go back to our internet. Mazda 6 firing order. 142, look at that. It's almost like I planned that, which I didn't. So, if we go back to here, no surprise. So our green trace right here, that is on our cylinder 4 coil. And the very next one in the firing order is cylinder 2. So if you see that big spike there, what does that tell you? You know what that tells me? It tells me a bad coil. Look at all that. Now, because one of the things we can do is, let's zoom in a little bit. Oh, I love picoscope. We'll get that box out of the way. Let's bring across some cursors. Put that one roughly there. Put this guy roughly there. Rulers, we want 6 because we got 6 cylinders. Now that we got that, now of course we are basing this off of, we want to try and find roughly the firing line for our cylinder 2. Great, I'm gonna try and have to get that wand in there. Yeah. And I'm gonna use this as a rough guess, but you know, we're talking only one third of, only 120 degrees of crank shaft rotation, right? So the engine's not going to change that much in speed difference off 120 degrees. Your ignition timing, these ones here, yeah, they're not really, it's not advanced enough to have separate ignition timing for each cylinder. So that looks like junk, right? That's because it is. But if we look, all this sort of junk happens after after our cursor that we put up there. So that would imply that happens right at the firing line, which would make me think that we probably don't have a shorted coil. We don't have a shorted primary, but we got nowhere for that energy to go. It builds up and it's an open circuit. So instead of going to a spark plug, it's just ringing back and forth. If you're following that, because when we zoomed in, all this noise here is a little after this line. If it were before that line, then we would say, hey, we got a bad coil for sure. But this might even be something such as, you know, what if there's massive water intrusion? What if the spring is rusted and corroded right away? Maybe it's not necessarily a bad coil, because what we're trying to do is we're just trying to determine as much as we possibly can from our lab scope without pulling the intake. So we see that we're not shorted. There's always a little bit of, you'll see a little bit of oscillations kind of at the turn on. We do have a ramp, and when I pulled up the cursors, all this noise right here seemed to happen after the firing line, after when it should have sparked, right? So when the coil was turned off. Now to me, what that seems like, that seems like an open secondary. Seems like that's got nowhere for that spark to go, and all that energy is just ringing back and forth. So does, you know, looking at this lab scope, does that really help us any? Does that really change anything? Well, in this case, honestly, not really. We knew that we had a cylinder 2 misfire, right? It's under the plenum. We got 194,000 kilometers. So we would have been perfectly fine to pull a plug, look at it, see that, hey, it's probably going to look pretty gungy, but we would have been perfectly fine to say, okay, we need to pull that plenum, we need to inspect the spark plug. While we're there, we'll change the spark plugs. At the very least, we'll change all three behind there. Definitely change cylinder 2 coil. Recommend changing all the coils underneath the intake plenum. They're a little harder to get to. On Fords, these 2-wire coils, the transistor that handles the current for that coil is inside the computer. So what happens, these coils, they short out and they can take out that transistor. So you can have a bad coil, you replace it with a good coil, it's still not firing because the old coil took out the driver in the engine computer. So of course we're changing that one coil. We'd recommend changing the 3 under there. You know, all that sort of stuff's up to them, right? So would that be bad to do that? The answer is no. It definitely wouldn't. You know what? While you're there, you'd want to check the fuel injectors. Now, I did with the amp clamp, and they all seem to be pretty well the same, so I don't see any reason why I would suspect a fuel injector. I will still do an ohms measurement of all of them. I won't go so far as to hooking up the fuel pressure drop tester, because you know what? Hey, that takes a bit of effort. But I'll definitely read the resistance out of all of them. If any of them are out by a decent amount, you know, say they're all supposed to be around 11, 12 ohms, you know, if I see one at 8 and if I see one at 16, yeah, we're going to change that while we're there. There's nothing wrong with that. But we do know that we, at the very least, if we don't see anything wrong, you know, if we pull that cylinder 2 spark plug and it looks nice and clean, we definitely are changing that coil. One of the things that's nice with our scope business is we do know 100% for certain that we have a secondary problem. Because it's coming and going, I would have to assume it's in the coil. But you know what? If you weren't lab scoping, you would have just changed that anyways, and you still would have fixed the problem. But the more you know. Sometimes it's good to, you know what, if you like doing lab scopes, sometimes you come across issues that you can only find with a lab scope. And really, the more you practice it, the better you get at it, the better you can do it without wasting time. Because that's one of the big things too. Once you start doing it, it takes you so much time setting up, but after a while you can do it pretty quickly. You can find conclusions pretty quickly. Okay guys, so we saw earlier that when we did our capture and we actually caught it misfiring, there was a lot of hash, a lot of excess energy feeding back into our primary circuit on our current ramps, and we saw that. Now, what I want wanted to do, because we are changing some of these coils, this is a little scary, a little sketchy, so you want to make sure all your equipment's out of the way. I got it on the floor. I have this coil unplugged, so I'm into cylinder 4 coil again on the primary. Or sorry, it's not unplugged, but the boot's just chilling up in the air, so that spark's got nowhere to go. I am going to run it for just a small amount of time, and let's see if we see that same thing on our current ramps. So, on that note, we got it running, capture's going. Let me quickly run that. Okay, really freaking need to get my attenuator for this scope before I burn it up, because yeah, they don't really like the open circuit primaries. These coils, they can produce up to 400 volts of feedback, and these guys here have an overload of 250. So what can you do though? You got to try it once, right? So this red trace right here, that is our our primary feed into coil number 4 for the control wire. And we see all of the noise on the current ramp right there. So indeed, what we saw the first time around, this confirms it's an open secondary, because all that stuff will feed back onto the primary. They're all kind of interconnected. So that is kind of neat. Gives us something to look at, something new to kind of put in our toolbox. Let's see if we can see kind of any others. And yeah, it's all kind of there. They all sort of have it. All that noise. So that's open secondary. Neat little new thing to look for. As I said earlier, you know, did we really need to do this? Not completely, but you know what? It furthers our learning. And we know 100% for certain that when we open this plenum, we can fix it. There's going to be no question marks, no scaries, none of that sort of stuff. It's just a matter of a bad coil and or spark plug and or boot. These coils are stupid cheap, so we'll be changing the 3 at the back. We can only get 4 today, so we'd only be changing the 3, and we'll be changing all the spark plugs, and away we go. Anyways, I just wanted to try this out, and sure enough, it does show on our current ramps. Okay, so I finished the job of the Mazda. Pulled the plenum, it's all relatively straightforward. Went back there and found some interesting things. Well, let me show you. So, saved all the coils, marked them along with the spark plug. It came out of them. See, this is cylinder 3. It looks fine. Spring looks fine. The grab cylinder 2. Was kind of expecting to see something on this, but you know what? You don't always. Looks fine. No immediate signs of any kind of anything. That pins are good too. Now, sometimes it's not always that in. You pull these boots out, you get to the spring. Sometimes it's right there. That corrodes. We pull that right out. Oh shoot! Dropping the spring. If you can look in there. No, I don't know if that's any better or worse. Probably can't see that. Yeah, it's not corroded. Nothing you're gonna see. It's all inside here. And yeah, so bad coils. They're cheap, stupid cheap. So we replaced all 3 in the back. We didn't have access to 6, otherwise we would replace them all, especially on these Fords. But no biggie. If we encounter any issues with any of the front ones, they're right there, easy to change. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention, one of the things that's also good about doing the lab scoping, or at least potentially helpful this time around, is what if, and this is normal and decent, nothing wrong with it, what if a person just pulled one of the front plugs, a nice easy spark plug to get to, and kind of done your figuring off there? What? Let me show you what you would have found. See these babies right here? NGKs. You know what? Frickin' thing always runs. Well, I forgot to turn the compressor off, so of course it has to run right in the middle of a quick little video clip. But anyways, so let's say going into this, you got a cylinder number 2 misfire. You read that with your scan tool sitting your butt in the seat, and before you go ahead and pull anything, you want to try and get as much of a story as you can tell the customer. So say you pull one of those front plugs, quick and easy to do, right? You want to see what's the condition of them, 190,000 kilometers. If they were original, you sure as heck would have a misfire from that, right? Well, if you did that, it kind of gauges what you would do later on. You could have potentially gotten bitten, because that's what you would have found. NGKs, presumably G-powers. Not too bad either, not too old. They've been in there for a little bit, but the gap's pretty good. Electrodes just fine. So if you saw these, you would say, hey, you know what? Someone did spark plugs. Plugs are fine. You don't really need new plugs. It's a bad coil. There's no rhyme or reason. Sometimes they just fail. Well, maybe you wouldn't have pulled one of the back spark plugs, because guess what's in the back? You know, the side underneath the plenum. Yeah, Motorcraft. Them's be original. That was in the front, right? That was in the front. This was in the back. So, general rule of thumb, one of the shops I worked at, they always did, no matter what, if you have a misfire that is spark, what they would always do, and you know what, I'm a proponent of this, you might as well, they always replaced, anytime they did a coil, they would replace the spark plug with it. So they always got one coil, one spark plug. Obviously, if all the plugs were old and worn, they'd get the full tune-up. But if the plugs were otherwise okay and the person didn't want to spend that money, and it was just a coil that failed, they always got a spark plug too. Because you never know if there's a problem with the spark plug, an old plug, right? You might have a carbon track on the porcelain. You might have a broken porcelain. You might have any number of things wrong with this spark plug that otherwise might be hard to see. And if you put a new coil in there, the new spark plug, you know, say if you got a carbon track on the porcelain of your spark plug, you put a new coil on there, that carbon track will meet up to rubber. It's not going to misfire right away, but eventually that carbon track will wear into the coil and you'll need another coil as well, right? So they always replaced one coil, one spark plug. If you had that line of thinking, then sure enough, you would have pulled the spark plug. You would have seen, hey, in the back, holy crap, we got originals. Somebody just went the easy route. So, not a bad thing to do. If you're going to change a coil, then change the spark plug too. At least pull it out. But anyways, that's all it was. It was just a bad coil. And, yeah, you know, the not changing the ones in the back. You might as well just not change any of them. Anyways, hopefully you guys learned something along the way. I learned a bunch of things as always. Always like kind of messing around with the lab scope. Just kind of honing skills, getting used to things. You never know what you're going to find. As well, if you got a little bit of spare time, if you see something like this where the secondary is breaking down, you see all that noise coming back into the primary through the current, you know what, mess around, try it once in a while. Obviously, don't have this thing sticking out for long. You can't run it for long. You can damage things, and don't have that spark anywhere that can go into any kind of electronics. But you know what? You got a little bit of time, mess around. That's how you learn things. So anyways, hopefully we all learned something today. Hopefully we had an okay time. We'll catch you in the next one, and thanks for watching. See you later.